Hello and welcome back to Tracking Trends. In the just concluded Parliament session, the government brought a legislation to replace the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme with a new plan. It goes by the acronym VBGRAMG, which stands for Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivika Mission Gramin. That's quite a mouthful. The move has stoked a lot of political controversy. Opposition parties are up in arms. There is much anxiety amongst the beneficiaries as to how the plan will roll out. A lot has already been said. Nonetheless, at the cost of repetition, here is how I see it, and here is my take on the subject. Before I go into it, a gentle reminder to subscribe to my channel. If you like it, share it with your friends and peers, and keep coming back. Let's first talk about the economics behind this move. The economics is pretty easy to figure. It's clearly aimed at reducing the central government's burden arising out of what we have so far known as the MGNREGA Act. Under the MGNREGA Act, which was promulgated in 2005, it is mandatory for the government to guarantee work to rural households for at least 100 days if they demand so. The Act provided a legal guarantee for such work. Up until now, 90% of the money that is spent on this program comes from the center. The states put in about 10%. The first big change that is sought in under this new program is that now states will have to put 40% of the money, and the center's share will stand reduced to 60%. Quite logically, this is intended to find ways wherein the government can reduce its spending. But why does the government want to reduce its spending? If we look at the current financial year, 2025-26, the government's tax collections are lagging way behind the targeted rates. In place of 15 to 17% growth that was expected or budgeted, we are seeing tax collections growing in single digits. The economy has still not gotten to a high growth trajectory, which means we are not seeing demand in the private sector turning around, which is why the government may have to keep propping up capital spending, spend more, and so therefore they have to find avenues where they can cut spending. And MGNREGA is an easy way out. At least it seems to be so, because its beneficiaries are the least influential segment, are people with the least amount of political clout. Its beneficiaries are, so to say, are voiceless. Sample this. In the current budget, the government provided for an allocation of 86,000 crore to be spent on MGNREGA. Up until now, 9 months are gone in the current financial year. It has spent about 52,000 crore. As much as 21,000 crore has gone toward clearing areas of the previous year. In other words, it has spent just about 30,000 crore, or about a third of what has been budgeted for the full year. So quite clearly, even the 86,000 crore that has been budgeted for the current year is not going to be spent. But that is not the point. The point is, even with MGNREGA, although it guaranteed 100 days of work, and it was a demand-driven scheme, meaning if people in villages wanted work, if through the panchayat they placed a demand for work, the government had to provide them with work, and if it didn't, it had to give them a compensation equivalent of the minimum wage that they are supposed to get under such work. Now, there are 12 crore MGNREGA workers in the country. If everyone was provided with 100 days of work, the government will have to spend 2,64,000 crore. The World Bank estimates that if MGNREGA had to be implemented in letter and spirit, it would cost 1.7% of GDP. What we are spending, or what we have been spending, is a meager 0.26%, or 1/6 of what we ought to be spending. So, when the need is actually to step up spending, to allocate more funds, what the center has done, it has changed the way the program works, even though it says now in place of 100 days, it would like to guarantee 125 days. That doesn't fly because there's a big change. The scheme will no longer be demand driven. It will be based on the assessment of the central government. The central government will notify where and how MGNREGA money will be spent. First, it will spend only 60% of the money that is required. Two, it will still decide and notify where and how MGNREGA money will be spent. Three, its decisions will not be driven by demand. So even though the word guarantee still appears, in reality, there will be no guarantee. Because only when the scheme is demand driven, when the scheme is bottom up, the whole purpose of calling it a guarantee works. But when it's going to be top down, it's going to be a program where people at the grassroots levels or the beneficiaries will have no say, then it ceases to have that character of being a guaranteed program. That brings us to the second question, that what happens when the central government takes within its purview the authority to decide where and how MGNREGA money will be spent. It is quite possible that states where parties other than the party that is ruling the center is in power could be discriminated. It is possible that when states are going into election, the center might choose to focus on those states to spend much of MGNREGA money, in a way trying to induce voters, which is what we have actually seen in the past, in as recent as the Bihar election, where the central government, during the middle of the elections, started dispersing 10,000 rupees into women voters' accounts. A move that is credited to a great extent for the phenomenal victory that the NDA secured in Bihar. So, in other words, it opens up possibilities of discrimination. It opens up possibilities of misuse of MGNREGA in a way for political purpose, political benefits. But more than that, it turns the very principle of federalism on its head. States are expected to spend 40%, yet they will have very little say in how the scheme works. Panchayats will no longer be entitled or empowered to place a demand for a project under MGNREGA. The very principle where MGNREGA defined, or rather empowered people with a right to work, that right to work is being taken away. People will no longer have a right to work. Instead, they will have to depend on the mercy of the powers be to get work under this program. Now, that's a very big fundamental change. And it goes counter to the very basic principle on which MGNREGA Act was brought in. MGNREGA was nothing but a manifestation of a vision that Mahatma Gandhi had articulated in his writing. On October 13, 1921, in Young India, he wrote that if a person is without work, if a person is idle, if a person has no food to eat, providing him work, providing him food against the work that he does, is in a way being God to him. MGNREGA was inspired by that vision, and it was guided by Gandhi's vision of decentralized development, Gandhi's vision of vesting power with panchayats, with the lowest tier of our democracy. That's being undone. It's not just a name change. This change cuts many layers. But before that, let's first finish off with the economics part. What happens when states are forced to pay 40% of what is to be spent on MGNREGA? The answer is simple. Given the state of finances of states today, many states will not be able to do it. Which are the states who suffer the most? It's the poorer states that suffer the most. For example, my home state, Odisha, it's one of the major beneficiaries of MGNREGA. It's a poor state that is prone to distress migration. For these people who migrate because they don't find enough work, because they don't own land that they can till, or even when they have a small plot of land, because there is no irrigation, they can grow only one crop. For the rest of the year, they have to look for work elsewhere. MGNREGA was a kind of a social safety net. It helped them secure livelihood in such times when agriculture was not providing them livelihood. These people, which is why in a state like Odisha, which accounts for about 4% of India's population, but when it came to MGNREGA, out of the 12 crore workers who benefit from MGNREGA, Odisha accounted for 1 crore, which is almost 9%. And a state like Odisha, and I'm sure the same would hold for Bihar, the same would hold for Jharkhand or many other poorer states, they are in the least advantaged position, or they are the least capable states to take out money from their own coffers and foot the 40% that the central government wants to do that. In other words, not only the poor are going to suffer, but the poor living in the poorer states are going to suffer more. And even then, if a state still wants to go ahead and continue with this plan as it used to, or provide jobs or provide work on the same level as it did, it will have to find money. Now, where will it find money? States today have very little avenues to raise their own revenue. As such, GST collections have been sluggish. The central government goes on levying newer cesses. And a cess, as you know, is not shared with states. As we speak, the Finance Commission has submitted its report. Not much has been reported about it in the media, but what I am given to understand that states should not expect much from this report, even though an overwhelming majority of states today are struggling to keep their finances in order. So what will they do? They will then look forward to whatever limited avenues they have to raise resources, to raise revenues, they will try to tap that. What are these avenues? The states decide at what rate electricity should be sold to consumers. They may choose to raise power tariffs. The states can levy taxes on roads. The states can increase the taxes that they levy on fuel, petrol and diesel. The states can levy higher taxes on theatres, entertainment. Who is going to bear that burden? People like you and me who live in cities. Which is why people like you and me living in cities need to bother about what's happening in our villages or what's happening with the program that's meant for our villages. The other critical aspect is that MGNREGA also guaranteed a minimum wage. And more often than not, this minimum wage became a benchmark for the labor to negotiate his employment elsewhere. So if a landless laborer in a village was to find work on the farm of a rich farmer or a landlord, he could use the minimum wage under the MGNREGA scheme as a bargaining chip. Even when he migrated, she or he migrated out of the state or out of his village to the cities or elsewhere, There too, she or he used the minimum wage guaranteed under MGNREGA as a bargaining chip. Today, we don't know whether a minimum wage is guaranteed. More importantly, the changes also suggest that for 60 days in a year, GRAMG will not be in force. These 60 days relate to agricultural season, which means when the crop has to be cut or sown. Now, what you are basically trying to do is you are now letting the big farmers, the landlords, decide at what rate they would like to employ labor. The labor would have no bargaining power. She or he will have to work at whatever wages are offered by these people, because there would be no MGNREGA that he or she can use as a bargaining chip. Many of these things have been highlighted. And what has been kind of projected that this program will give 125 days of guaranteed work in place of 100 days. Now let's get the facts right here. Even with MGNREGA, as a parliamentary committee on the subject that submitted its report in June this year pointed out, even under MGNREGA, the average man days of work that was provided was about 50, not 100. Now, if you were to provide 100 days, some estimates say that the government actually would have to spend 2,60,000 crore. And now that you are saying you would like to do 125 days, it means you may have to spend 3 lakh crore. Now 3 lakh crore means states will have to fork out 1,20,000 crore. There is no way that's going to be possible, because that money is simply not there with the states. Even a fraction of that is not available with the states, which means states will not be able to provide that money, and therefore the way it is projected that it will be 125 days of guaranteed work is not going to happen. The bigger question is, why are we doing this? If the idea is to cut spending, that's a very short-term idea, because the problem that we confront today is that there isn't enough demand in the economy, which is why private investment is not picking up. By putting more money in the hands of rich, you don't trigger consumption. You trigger consumption when you put money in the hands of the poor. If you put 100 rupees in the hands of a poor, he would spend 95 rupees. If you put 100 rupees in the hands of a rich, he will probably spend only 5 rupees. So at a time when you are struggling to step up consumption, doing away with a program that employed millions of poor, provided livelihood, offered a social safety net, can only be deemed as a stupidest of ideas that one can come up with. Now let's talk about the politics behind it. The politics plays out at multiple levels. First, why are we trying to centralize everything? The change is clearly intended, it kind of appears to be a continuation of everything that has been happening under the current regime. In every sphere, the current regime is trying to centralize decision making. The centralization that we are seeing is not going to be in the long-term interest of a country as diverse as ours, with 140 crore people. 140 crore people cannot be governed by a few government buildings and a handful of government officers in New Delhi. It's a mistake for which the country will pay a very heavy price in the time to come. The idea of making it now a centralized scheme, much like what the current party has done with its choice of chief ministers in the states, where they just pick anybody they want, ignoring the local popularity of any leader, because they have been trying to uh, perfect this centralized model of governance. We saw it during the pandemic, how a lot of powers of the states were usurped. We see it in policies like the new education policies, where things that were within the purview of the states were transferred into the center's control, or are being now decided by the center. Now, it's kind of trying to alter the political map of India, and changing Manrega in the manner it is being done is just an extension of that intent, and is an extension of that program. But why remove the name of Mahatma Gandhi? Why and come up with such a mouthful of an acronym called VV Ramji? In fact, I think if anybody who would have been pained by this name change would be God Ram himself. Because if any, the most revered devotee of his who has walked on this land is Mahatma Gandhi. The man who died uttering the words Hey Ram and Hey Ram, his name is being taken away from a program that was inspired by his vision, by the vision of the father of the nation, of our independence leader. I am not sure how this is going to go down with people of this country. Chances are it will not. Time will tell us. Thank you very much for watching. Keep coming back to us. Share our channel with your friends and peers, and do subscribe.